The rise and fall of Mars Hill. Welcome to Season 2. If you have gone through Season 1 with us, we talked a lot about questions that the youth posed to you. Is that right?
Yeah, mostly apologetics.
And so in this season, we're going to take on kind of a different format. This is going to be almost a true crime style podcast where we will be going through famous movements within the pop culture church, within Christianity, whether they are Christian or aren't Christian. That's for you to decide. But what we're going to do is be presenting the rise and fall of certain movements throughout history, and ultimately derive lessons from these major movements, people, figures, many of whom that people may have not even really heard about before.
Right.
Yeah, I remember growing up and you telling me about Jim Jones and the People's Temple. It's like, what the heck is that?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
He was an interesting character.
And that was a straight up cult where people drank Kool-Aid or not Kool-Aid and killed how many people?
900 plus people
900.
committed suicide.
Dang. Now that obviously was not Christian,
Right.
but it was definitely within Christian pop culture at that time, being reported on headlines in newspapers.
Yep.
Hopefully our audience will walk away, if they are students of history, which I imagine a lot of them do love history, whether they're digging into Roman ancient architecture or World War II or Vietnam War type stuff, as I like to. But in this particular case, there are some fascinating characters even I did not know about. And upon doing research, we decided to start with Mars Hill.
What a great place to start.
Yes. So Mars Hill was right down the street in Seattle, Washington.
Yep.
And just asking you, without any kind of prompting beyond, have you read any of the pastor's books? Mark Driscoll, have you heard any of his sermons?
Have not read his books, but have listened to many of his sermons. Matter of fact, he's in my little favorites on my laptop, and I do listen to him regularly on his sermons. Not a lot. He's a great Bible teacher, really, on the surface. And
I imagine many people who are the cantankerous ones out there might even push pause already and say, "Oh, he's a heretic. How dare you?"
Yeah, Mark Driscoll. We don't want to talk about Mark Driscoll
because he is a very polarizing figure.
He is indeed.
And so, I concur. I would say I've read a couple of his books, and I would say 98% of what he says, I'm like, yeah, that's pretty solid. The 2% that I don't really agree with 100% aren't really make or break issues in my opinion.
Yeah.
But for the most part, his theology is pretty good.
His theology, I think, is very good. We'll get into this, but I think his delivery is what gets people.
And thus we begin the story of Mars Hill. In 2013, Mars Hill Church looked almost unstoppable.
Yep.
More than 12,000 people attended every weekend across 15 campuses in 4 states, and hundreds and thousands more watched the sermons online every single week. Mark Driscoll, the pastor who we were just talking about, had become one of the most recognizable pastors in America, and churches all over the country were studying Mars Hill and asking, how did they grow this fast? Then, almost unbelievably, it all came apart. A little over a year later, the entire organization was gone. So if I were to ask you to make a wild prediction, pretending that you don't know the story of Mars Hill, but you are a learned man, and this is kind of an unfair question, you probably know this content.
And if I'm not, I'll make it up.
Great. Just lie. No. So what would you say was their downfall? Was it money? Was it bad theology? Was it a moral behavior? What would your prediction be?
It's tough. As you said, this is a little close to home because I was working in a neighborhood of Seattle called Fremont at the time, and Mars Hill was right down the street. I think technically they were in Ballard, and I saw this kind of out of my corner of my eye, this church growing just amazingly, and this real charismatic preacher. I think at that time he was probably in his mid to late 20s. He was a young man, and like you said, they were growing, and it was just remarkable. And then I ended up moving my employment out of Seattle. I was no longer in Fremont, but kind of kept an ear on their church. And as you said, Controversy started sneaking into it.
Yeah.
And to answer your question, my own opinion of what his downfall was, it was not theological. I have yet to find any bold heresy out of his teaching.
Right.
It was not financial. He played around with selling his books and stuff, and there's some criticism around
We'll get
that.
to that. That's
Yeah, yeah,
fascinating.
yeah. And so it was not sex, which brings down a lot of preachers I know.
Right.
Um, in looking at it, it is a tiny bit of accountability. He was very, very polarizing personality.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if he had the accountability built into his ministry. A lot of the criticism that was weighed towards Mark's direction was toxic masculinity, is what the phrase they used.
Interesting. Ooh, that's tough because the word toxic can be thrown around
Yes.
by either the extreme left or the extreme right, and
Oh, yeah.
even the quote moderates and independents,
Mhm.
which no one really is. They just like to claim that.
Exactly.
Because, yeah, anyway, that's a fallacy. But the toxic thing, like, oh, you're a toxic person.
Yeah.
That can be thrown around a lot. But I would almost say it was an extremist. He pushed the envelope, which we're going to get into this with this
he
story
did indeed,
right here.
especially on sex. He
Oh,
loved to talk about sex, and again, it's an uncomfortable topic for a lot of Christians. Sex specifically between husband and wife.
Right.
So he kind of talked a lot about that. And that, I think, made a lot of people's toes curl and say, we're not so sure that a preacher ought to be talking about this, which I think he should.
Right.
Because the Bible talks a lot about it.
Absolutely,
So,
it does. Yeah.
yes.
And I remember visiting Mars Hill at one point, and the music was awesome. The preaching was right on. It was a classic mega church type experience where you can easily slip in, slip out. And I would almost say that that's why so many people celebrated the downfall of Mars Hill, is because it was a mega church.
Right.
And everybody likes to root for the little guy, the underdog. And when the big one falls, it's very easy for us to wag our fingers and say,
yeah.
well, see, I saw it coming.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
grew too fast. Which is a shame because it didn't start out as a megachurch.
Right.
It started in 1996 as a Bible study in Mark and Grace Driscoll's living room, along with two co-founders, Leif Moy and Mike Gunn. Mark was only 25 years old, so you were right. Yeah, he was fairly young. And Seattle wasn't exactly known for embracing Christianity.
Really?
Nor is it still. It's a challenging mission field.
Oh,
so,
man.
my hat's off to anybody, including Mark and the co-founders, for trying to tackle this bull.
Yeah.
So, if anything, it had a reputation as one of the least churched cities in America. So instead of trying to look like a traditional church, Mars Hill intentionally spoke the language of the city around it. The sermons were direct, the atmosphere was casual, and they talked openly about real life, real sin, real struggles, as you said, including sex and money and everything else that a lot of pastors will be like, nah, I'm going to ruffle some feathers. I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
He took it head on.
He did.
So for a generation that viewed church as outdated or disconnected, it was refreshing. Ironically, it was not actually an instant success. The first public service in October of '96 drew about 160 people, but attendance quickly dropped to around 60. There wasn't much money, there wasn't a polished production, and in the early days there wasn't even enough income to pay Mark a salary. So looking back, there wasn't much that suggested this little church would someday influence Christians across the country, but slowly, things changed. People invited friends, attendance climbed, the church was finally able to bring Mark on full-time, and by 2003, they'd moved into a big, renovated warehouse in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood, which you were just talking about. Oh!
Hey.
From there, the growth accelerated in ways very few churches have ever experienced. If a hipster who was living on Capitol Hill was like, you know what, I'm going to try this church thing for a moment. What do you think were the main factors that drew younger people to this strange church? A lot of them probably even growing up in, quote, the church.
Right.
What attracted them?
Mark, as we've said, Mark talked about things that regular pastors don't talk about, and he
Hmm.
talked about them with authority
With authority.
and a
That's
scriptural
interesting.
background and backup on it.
Hmm.
Uh, Again, the masculinity part, he challenged young men to be young men and not to be this
Ah,
feminized apologetic Christian
gotcha.
that is not taking a stand with either his family
Hmm.
or with relationship, if they're not married, with relationships with women, of
Hmm.
being chivalrous and being a solid person, square in your faith, and not being wishy-washy.
Right.
So, and I think that was refreshing to that
Right.
Gen X, Gen Z population who was just used to preachers not confronting pop culture issues like that.
Gotcha. And that's true. I've seen that also with Jordan Peterson and
Mm-hmm.
how often
Exactly.
he attracts young, white, heterosexual Christian men to his
Yep.
conferences,
Yep.
and overwhelmingly so. And I think you hit something that's rather insightful, and that is the desperation for young heterosexual Christian men to find an identity.
Yeah.
For so many years, it's always been they're the villain, they're the ones who are responsible for systemic fill in the blank. Always use the word systemic or use the
Right.
word toxic. They were always
Exactly.
responsible
It's
for
a
this.
great
And so
word.
for
Yeah.
once in their life, they have someone who is guiding them and saying, look, you can be responsible to create a secure household, to stand up, to be the bold spiritual leader in your household.
Right.
And that was attractive.
Mm-hmm.
And it still is very much attractive to
And it
have that guidance.
yes, and it's very biblical too,
Absolutely.
which I think if I could poke a finger at the mainstream Christian messages that are preached on Sunday, they dance around those issues. They don't
Ah,
challenge the young man a man, to be a young man, to be an authority figure in his home, because all of that flies in the face of the wokeism that has
right.
creeped its way into the church.
Hmm.
And that if you say that I'm going to be a leader in my family, and I'm going to lead my wife, and I'm going to protect her, and be an example to her and my
To
children,
be a warrior.
yeah, be a warrior,
Yeah.
exactly. That makes the more liberal side of our faith kind of cringe and say,
Uh-huh.
oh, that's
Oh,
too
are
masculine.
you saying that you're better than
Yeah,
women? Are you, yeah, what
exactly.
about all the feminists out there? And
Oh
right, right,
yeah.
right. And
Yep.
then that immediately silences those young men who otherwise have just found an identity, a
Yeah.
purpose, a
Yeah.
calling. It's like,
Exactly.
wow, I can't birth a human like a woman can. What can I do?
Yeah.
It's like, is there anything within my DNA that makes me special?
Right.
And here is Mark Driscoll guiding them.
Yeah.
And so, yes, many people would say Mark Driscoll, but there was another form of innovation that Mars Hill did, and that was video campuses.
Yes.
This was revolutionary at that time. So
Yep.
nowadays, everybody's listening to a podcast, a video, no big deal.
Right.
Back then, they could capture a message and broadcast it to how many? Was it 4 campuses?
Oh yeah.
That's
Amazing.
incredible. And
Amazing.
the model worked. One campus became several became 15.
Yep.
There's a magazine called Outreach Magazine, and it ranked Mars Hill among the fastest growing churches in America. And soon, Mark became a best selling author and helped launch Acts 29, which is a church planting network.
Yep.
Still around today.
Exactly.
Fantastic network. So, from a living room Bible study to one of the most influential churches in the country, all in less than 20 years.
Yep. Exactly. And if I could digress here just for a second on the real estate stand,
Yeah.
it was very wise of him to do that, because most churches say, well, we're growing, we need a bigger building. Sometimes you do. But
Ah.
Mark, as his church grew, he, as you say, he ended up doing a lot of podcasts, probably weren't
Hmm.
called that back then, and he did video sermons out to people who could watch the sermons from their laptop in a coffee shop. And he didn't have to go out and buy 25 buildings.
Right.
So from a financial standpoint, it was incredibly way ahead of his time. and he was being very frugal with his money. I tip my hat to that.
Why not replicate this by leveraging technology?
Exactly.
Which is exactly what I do with Knok Studio. So I am a missionary videographer, and since 2010, I have used video to capture powerful messages and broadcast them out into the world. And so, for example, this podcast, we're reaching hundreds upon hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And yet we're two guys in a coffee shop.
Yeah.
We can't pack this place out with 500, 600, 1,000 people.
Thank you, Casting Iron.
Thank you, Casting Iron.
There we go.
Coffee shop.
For loaning
they wouldn't want 1,000 people coming in.
No.
Poor Deb. Oh, is she listening? She made great coffee today.
She did indeed. Oh, my goodness.
Back to the story, shall we, of Mars Hill.
Yes.
Now, thousands did genuinely meet Jesus. Marriages were restored. And people who had never considered even walking into a church suddenly found themselves opening a Bible. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because obviously if you were in 2012, you walked into Mars Hill, you wouldn't say to yourself, well, this church is in trouble. Quite the opposite. You probably would have said, I wish my church would be doing something like what they're doing. The warning signs were not obvious, and most people missed them completely. By looking back, there was one decision that quietly changed the trajectory of the entire ministry. It actually happened back in 2007, a year after I graduated from Whitworth University. And it wasn't during a sermon. It was not during a scandal. It happened in a boardroom. This is the business side of churches and how they operate. Ooh. Mars Hill rewrote its bylaws. And if you don't know what bylaws are, it's a governing document that dictates how an organization should operate.
Right.
And every nonprofit or every corporation should have bylaws to kind of keep you accountable.
Yeah.
So you're not having leadership going off the deep end. Managing McDonald's, and all of a sudden they say, we're selling tacos tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like, no. Let's stick with the bylaws and how we make decisions. But they changed the bylaws. So the new structure concentrated authority into a much smaller executive group, with Mark Driscoll carrying significantly more influence than before. Yeah. Now, to be fair, there were practical reasons. The church was growing rapidly, campuses were multiplying, and large organizations often centralize simply because decisions have to be made faster.
Right.
You've probably seen that. The larger an organization gets, you get paralysis by analysis. There's just way too many moving parts.
Right.
So, okay, it made sense to simplify the leadership, the decision making. But not everyone agreed that this was a good trade-off. Two pastors, mainly Paul Petrie and Bent Meyer, they objected that the changes removed important layers of accountability, which I believe you mentioned at the beginning of this. Well, both men were commended for standing up in opposition. Oh, no, I misread that. Both men were fired that fall.
Out of here.
Yeah. And co-founder Leif Moy was eventually forced out as well. So even the co-founder. Yeah. Have you ever been a part of any organizations, companies where leadership starts to get a bit too haughty, bit too concentrated, and you're like, wait a second.
Gee, I can think of a few that will go unnamed, but yes. And to be fair, it's usually when there's a new CEO, and the new CEO comes in and has his or her vision for the company, and that's the time of transition, and some people have to go. And maybe this was the situation at Mars Hill.
Right. And it's a little difficult to judge whether or not this was a good or bad decision because attendance kept growing. Books kept selling, new campuses kept opening. If anything, Mars Hill looked healthier than ever. And that's one of the hardest things about leadership. Success can validate decisions that aren't actually healthy in the long run, which is kind of unfair to, hindsight is 2020, where who can look into a crystal ball and say, well, this is not a good decision.
There is something you said a few paragraphs ago I wanted to comment on. They didn't see it coming.
Oh, what do you mean by that?
Well, the church was growing. So first of all, is that the sole caliber? Is that the sole thing indicator that you think, oh, then everything must be right then if it's growing? Far be it from us to cause the church not to grow. right? But I wonder why they didn't see this coming. And the gentlemen that you mentioned here, the gentlemen's that you mentioned here that were let go and fired, I firmly believe they were men of God. They had the best intentions for Mars Hill, but Mark was and is a my way or the highway kind of guy.
Ah,
And the accountability was attempted to be overlaid on his leadership, but he was so charismatic and so
he's got a
uh,
hard personality.
hard personality.
Yeah.
Who on earth wants to cross this
We're
guy?
gonna challenge
Not
the
me.
guy.
I'm
Yeah.
going to get fired like these other three guys, right?
Gotcha.
So it instilled this, I think, unhealthy fear or unhealthy admiration that they
Hmm.
had for him, which at sometimes I think when that happens, you give that person a bit too much leeway to go ahead and make the decisions that he thinks are right
Yeah.
instead of saying, hold on a second.
Huh.
uh, and those three guys evidently did. They held up their finger and said, hold on a second, and it didn't fare too well for them.
Ooh, boy.
So it's still an outstanding question in my mind of why they didn't see this coming. And there were a lot of people, not just those three, but there were a lot of people that were holding up the red flag saying, something's amiss here.
Yeah.
And Mark engineered it in a way where he had the deciding vote and the church was going to
Wow.
follow him.
Wow.
So,
In late 2013, the first public controversy appeared. Christian radio host Janet Mefford accused Mark Driscoll live on the air of using unattributed material in one of his books.
mm-hmm.
Oh, he's stealing stuff.
Yep.
Mark later acknowledged citation mistakes and apologized. Okay, good for him.
Yep.
So, as you were saying, maybe he needs some humility, but
Yeah.
this could be an indicator of that humility.
Yep.
Standing alone, I don't think that controversy would have destroyed Mars Hill.
Right.
But what it did was encourage people to start looking more closely
Uh-huh.
at his leadership.
Yep.
As reporters and former staff members dug deeper, additional stories emerged. One involved Real Marriage, a best selling book Mark
Mm-hmm.
had written with his wife. Documents obtained by World Magazine showed that the church had paid a marketing company called Result Source, and they spent more than $200,000 in a campaign designed to push the book onto the New York Times bestseller list. Basically, they were gaming the system
Yeah.
to try to get more
Yeah.
eyes on this book. The issue wasn't just that books had been purchased, it was that donated ministry funds that had helped finance the effort, and most church members had no idea.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Around the same time, questions surfaced about Mars Hill's global fund. Many donors believed their gifts primarily supported international missions in places like Ethiopia and India. Two places of which I have done mission work.
Uh-huh.
Ethiopia, I remember the food very. Yeah, that was tough. It takes someone with a rare spiritual gift to enjoy that.
And a strong
A
stomach.
strong stomach. I hit my goal weight very quickly. Well, later reporting suggested a significant portion had instead gone to ministry expansion and operating expenses here in the United States, not Ethiopia and India. Mars Hill acknowledged that its communication around the fund had created confusion and offered donors the chance to redirect future giving. Okay, but at that point, trust had begun to erode.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So what struck me wasn't actually the headlines, it was who started speaking. So co-founder Leif Moy publicly admitted the leadership culture had become unhealthy, and a whole group of former pastors posted public confessions online, acknowledging they should have confronted problems much sooner. And Paul Tripp, a respected counselor who had
Yep.
briefly served on the church's accountability board, described Mars Hills as the most abusive, coercive ministry culture he'd ever been involved with.
Ouch. There's that word again. Another trigger word, abusive.
Uh-huh.
Wow. And that's interesting because if you think about it, we haven't talked about anything having to do with heresy.
Interesting.
We haven't talked about sexual misconduct.
Right.
It's again, more geared towards Mark's personality of being a very, very strong leader, my way or the highway. And
Right.
if you think about this in a business situation, I have worked for very strong personalities before. Uh, and a lot of people can't do that. I mean, goodness sakes, Elon Musk is one of them.
Hmm.
Very strong personality and a little bit on the wacky side,
Yeah.
but he's incredibly successful in what he's doing. And what I think Mark and other leaders like that have done is that they have not recognized their strength,
Mm.
and just as important, recognize and admit to their weakness. And what
Ah.
very successful, strong leaders do is they hire people alongside them to shore up their weaknesses.
Mm.
I worked for a very strong personality before, and he was a brilliant mind at business and strategy and financial, and could just really kind of read the market and being able to do that. And we had a lot of people working for us, and he was not a people person.
Oh.
And you know
Oh.
what he did? He hired me. And I was able really to backstop him and say, hey, look, you know what? I almost said his name. You know what? Let me take care of this. Let me bring the people along. And that's, I think, what a lot of strong Christian leaders don't do.
Mm.
Either he needed an associate pastor or a youth minister or somebody to be able to backstop him
Huh.
and to shore up where he was bad at doing it. Who knows? Maybe Mark thought he was a good people person.
Yeah.
It proved out that he wasn't,
Yeah.
because he was unable to bring people along with him in his vision.
Mm.
And that is sad, because I'm sure his vision was correct.
Right.
But how it came out was, we're going to do this. And if you're not on the Mars Hill bus, it's one of his quotes,
Really?
then we're going to run you over. Out of here.
Dang.
Yeah. Talk about a people person, right?
Wow.
There's your
Right.
choice.
Right? That's wise insight. Well, guess what happened to this momentum?
Yeah.
In summer of 2014, the momentum completely reversed. Attendance dropped by thousands, giving plummeted, staff layoffs followed. Then something happened that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Protesters started gathering outside a Mars Hill campus calling for Mark to resign. So imagine arriving at a church on Sunday morning and walking past picket signs before you even reach the front door. That alone tells you how deeply divided things had become.
Right.
On August 8th, 2014, the Acts 29 Network, the very church planting organization Mark had helped found, removed both him and Mars Hill from membership. That decision carried enormous weight because it came from fellow pastors, not necessarily secular critics.
Right.
Later that month, 21 former Mars Hill pastors filed formal charges. 21.
Yeah.
And the church launched an internal investigation. And thus, it was a very serious effort. Roughly 1,000 hours of work, more than 50 witnesses were interviewed, about 200 pages of findings. And the conclusion was that Mark had been domineering, quick-tempered, harsh in his speech. But the investigation, as you mentioned, really found no charges of immorality, financial theft, or even false teaching.
Interesting. Pause.
Yeah.
Domineering,
Uh-huh.
quick-tempered, and harsh in speech. Think about those. I mean, can you actually say that those are sins? Possibly.
I'd have to hear some examples.
Exactly.
But I could also even, not calling Mark Driscoll reincarnated Jesus,
Right.
but I could even come up with examples of Jesus being very direct in his speech and
Exactly.
very domineering and with that authority. So
Yeah.
if you and I are called to be Christ-like,
You know, the money changers and the whip situation,
that
could you
wasn't-
call that quick-tempered? Probably not. But that is interesting that, again, a strong personality. Was he in sin? Probably not. Was he being an idiot? Probably.
yes.
It's not a sin to be an idiot.
Right. So if you were on the elder board, and for those of you who don't know what an elder board is, they're basically the spiritual caretakers. They're the guys on the board of directors of a church who are in charge of hiring and firing major positions within the church, such as a pastor. And so if you were in that position, would you, as the elder, choose? Would you sack him, fire him? Would you go by way of restoration? Would you get a, what do they call them? PIPs, performance
Oh,
improvement plan?
process,
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Like, what
Which
would you?
I'm sure he was on, if they called it that or not. But it was basically calling him on the carpet in writing, right?
Right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Especially considering all these protesters and
Yeah.
21 pastors coming forward. And that's exactly what they chose. The board chose restoration. They developed a plan involving counseling, reconciliation, and increased accountability.
And a sabbatical,
Oh, that's nice.
which they
Okay.
offered to Mark, and he took, which I think is good. It's good for any person high in leadership. When they find themselves with controversy and pushback, maybe it is good for them to take a rest, go out on an island somewhere, hike into the woods, and do some soul searching, which Mark attempted to do.
Yeah.
But from my recollection, he came back not changed.
Oh boy.
Okay.
Yeah, and thus, less than 3 weeks later, Mars Hill announced it would dissolve entirely.
Yep.
And that was in 2014.
Yeah.
And if you're tracking the trajectory, the timeline here, this is a fast rise and fall
Yeah.
for an organization this large. You
It
would
is
think
indeed.
if this juggernaut got going, it's going to take at least 50 years for them to dissolve. No, no, no.
No,
How about less than?
and you think about how many pastors
Mm.
were issuing, formal complaints.
Yeah.
That breaks my heart to see.
Yeah.
It is just heartbreaking and sad to see fellow Christians unable to come to some sort of meeting of minds and be able, and evidently they tried, and there were a lot of people. And again, I go back and I think, how many pastors were there? 20, 20 plus,
21, I believe,
21?
came
Yeah.
forward with formal. Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah.
Could they have all been wrong? Possibility,
That's
but
it.
it seemed like they were trying to be productive in
Right.
calling attention to Mark's harsh personality. And so, anyway, they tried. They tried restoration, like you
Right.
said, didn't work.
And in a matter of weeks, a ministry that took 20 years to build unraveled. And in January 1st,
Wow.
2015, all the churches essentially broke apart. Mars Hill officially dissolved, and they all became individual churches.
Right.
And so that is the rise and fall of Mars Hill. This is a rather difficult story to tell because I imagine a lot of even people out there who love to criticize Christians and again wag their fingers and say, well, see, that's what happens to a megachurch. That's what them gets.
Yeah.
But I want to caution people out there that if you are in a church, the very nature that you are at a church, you are surrounded with broken people.
Mm-hmm.
Broken people who hopefully are acknowledging it. And that's the thing, that Mark didn't necessarily acknowledge that brokenness.
Right.
Maybe he didn't have the foresight. Maybe he was so enamored with the growth of his ministry and the success coming out of it that he was blinded. I don't know. But what would you tell people someday when they're in a church and a major pillar within their church fails? Whether it's morally, financially,
Yep.
or even just personality wise. Like, what would you tell these people? Because it's going to happen to
Right.
everybody listening in podcast land.
Yeah, exactly. Here, I want people who are listening to us to close their eyes and to think about going to church.
Unless you're driving. If you're driving
Don't
and
close your
listening
eyes.
to this, don't close your eyes.
Maybe close one eye. Yeah. All right. You go to church next Sunday, and your lead pastor is not there. One of the elders comes up to the microphone, or associate pastor, or whoever, second in command, third in command, and they say, "I'm sorry, Pastor X won't be here today. This past week, we have found unequivocally, and he admitted to fill in the gap.
Sure.
He embezzled the church funds by thousands of dollars. He was in extramarital sexual relationships with somebody, and he has quit basically the church. Okay, this is your lead pastor.
Right.
What would you think? Okay, do your first reaction is, I'm going to defend them. So and so couldn't possibly do that. I'm sure they're wrong, right? No, he admitted to it. and he is leaving. What would that do to your faith?
Ooh, that's a really good question, because I imagine a lot of people would immediately say, "Oh, well, I would stick around," but I think we'd be surprised how many people go to a church because of that strong personality that they
Personality.
see behind the pulpit.
Exactly.
And thus, if I were to say to look at the biblical structure of the church, they talked about elders. They spread out the leadership decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I am looking for a church for my family, I specifically look for a church that is guided by an eldership board of directors,
Yep.
not necessarily a top-down guy. That's
Right.
a warning flag for me.
Yes.
Because as we're talking about this, we all sin. And this guy is going to sin. He's going to disappoint you. He's going to say something offensive. He's going to do something offensive. And when you have a church that is an upside down pyramid, it's very tippy, as opposed to a pyramid with a very stable foundation of elders.
Right.
So when I go to a church and I say, "What's your structure like?" or my church that I go to, when I first talked with the pastor, Pastor Paul, Paul, if you're listening to this, I apologize. I actually said, "Paul, can the elders fire you?"
No, you didn't.
I did.
You
It
did.
was shameful.
You know why?
Yeah.
I asked him the same question. They're thinking, boy, these Chevassus guys, they really want me out of here. No, but it's a great question.
Right. I want to know, how do you carry 51% of the vote?
And his answer was?
I said, absolutely. If they wanted me out of here,
Exactly.
they could all come together, they could vote, and I could be gone.
How many?
Pack my
and Paul,
bags.
how many votes do you have? He said, one.
One.
That satisfied me. He was accountable.
Right,
And that's
that accountability.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So look for that style church,
Yeah.
not because it's a structure that is how corporations are structured in the United States, which by the way, it's kind of biblical to have that board of directors
Yep.
in a corporate sense. But when you look through, is it First Thessalonians? Someone who knows the Bible better than me. Titus, when they're talking about the qualifications of an elder. And
Second Timothy.
Yeah. The Second Timothy.
Yeah.
Thank you. And those people are responsible for making the spiritual decisions in the church and guiding them.
Yep.
So what can a pastor do? They can teach from the pulpit. They
Yep.
can do a lot of the day-to-day type administrative work, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, when it comes down to some spiritual issues that they have to grapple with, they need to have that ultimate authority to hire and fire even a very strong personality.
Absolutely. And just because your lead pastor is a good teacher doesn't mean he is good at everything else.
What do you mean by that?
He is a teaching pastor, and he may not be the best at human resources. And so if a staff member is continuing to show up late to work and is not there, he may look at him and say, "Where have you been, you idiot?"
Right?
Which probably would not be the best approach. And so he would want an HR person or an associate pastor who could deliver that message just as effectively but less harsh, right?
Interesting. Or administrative type stuff. Maybe
Exactly.
he's a great public speaker.
Yep.
But on Monday, he cannot for the life of him craft a mass email to send out by 10 a.m.
Exactly.
Hire someone with the gift of administration.
Exactly.
I gotcha.
There was a pastor of the church where I first became a Christian years ago. His name is Louis Neely. And I'll never forget, he said to us, "You know what? Don't put your faith in me, because eventually I will disappoint you. I will do something that will just make you really sad. Don't put your faith in me. Put it in Jesus. Because when I'm long gone, Jesus will never, never let you down."